Welcome to our show. I'm Julien Benichou and I'm here with Kurt Nikkanen.
Hi, great to be here.
We are today going to talk to Kurt about his career as a violinist. I want to ask him over the next 2 weeks questions about all sorts of musical questions about his career that blends solo playing, orchestra playing, teaching privately at the university, chamber music. But today I want to focus questions on his concertos. Kurt has played, obviously, as having had a career as a soloist, has played a lot of concertos, and I want to ask him about all of his favorite concertos and how he prepares them. So um, let's start with the first question. Kurt, do you have a general method to prepare concertos, or is it adapted to the piece every time? Or
Well, it's adapted to the piece in the sense that you work on old pieces somewhat differently than a brand new piece that you've never seen before. I mean, if you're learning a contemporary piece that's maybe never had a performance and you're the first, that's a particular kind of challenge. And if you're working on a piece that everybody knows very, very well, like the Mendelssohn, for example, that's its own kind of challenge. Um, Another thing may be a piece that you approach differently later in your career that you studied very early in life as a young student carries a lot of baggage with it. And certain pieces I actually resisted playing until well into my professional life because I had so much negative baggage associated with them as a student. Like my first, I think my first ever public concerto performance was Mozart Fourth Concerto. So that one has a very particular kind of emotional memory for me, shall we say. Very stressful, I would say. And it wasn't with full orchestra. My teacher was really brilliant in this regard, and he would set up concerts for the students arranged with the orchestra part arranged for string quartet. So I had this opportunity to play Mozart 4 with a string quartet of other students. And I don't remember how it went. I'm sure it was fine, basically, but just something about the emotional memory of that time and the Mozart concerto, which seemed very difficult for me at that age. I think I don't know, 7 or 8, left a lot of scar tissue. So I didn't really want to revisit it until 3 or 4 years ago, shall we say. I played it, but I wouldn't seek it out. Whereas other pieces I wanted to play since the time I can remember. I wanted to play the Barber Concerto. I wanted to play the Stravinsky Concerto. Since about that same age, when I first heard them on the radio, I just couldn't wait. And my teacher would say, no, they're too advanced, they're for later. But I bought the music anyway, and I kept it in my music cabinet until I was older and I could study them. So I studied them both when I was a student at Juilliard and so on. But it's not that easy to find opportunities to play those two concertos. So it's interesting that in my life, I have evolved into a job, the New York Concertmaster of New York City Ballet, where part of my job is playing those two concertos over and over again. It's almost as if I found this job for subconscious reasons so that I could play my favorite two 20th century concertos as many times as I want. And so we should talk a little bit about when you're preparing for any concerto. I mean, it's a particular kind of preparation that gets you the best results, I would say. And you're really dependent on, first of all, you need a good piano accompanist. That's absolutely key. In my studio at Juilliard, Dorothy DeLay was my teacher. She had a few really wonderful accompanists who knew the whole concerto literature backwards and forwards. They played it so many times, and they could play it any speed, any way you would want. And what she would do in the course of a lesson is, if we had an upcoming concerto appearance with a regional orchestra, let's say, she would have the accompanist play really badly. to prepare us for the experience, because you would get spoiled having such a gifted accompanist follow you perfectly in every lesson, no matter what you did, no matter how you distorted the tempo or the liberties you would take. This person would be with you all the time. So she would say, okay, today we're going to throw all of that out the window and give you a dose of reality. And so she would have the accompanist not follow you and deliberately kind of play badly in order to try to throw you off and simulate what it would be like at the first rehearsal with an orchestra that you didn't know. And I'm telling you, that was the best training ever, because it made you flexible, but able to kind of stick to your game no matter what sounds you heard around you. And so I was really grateful for that. That was my first kind of lesson in flexible musicianship and adapting to the moment.
And for our listeners here, I've conducted concertos with Kurt many times, and I've always found that he's able to adapt to whatever happens in the orchestra. But at the same time, as a conductor, I found that he's very easy to accompany, because you always know what he wants, despite the fact that he's extremely flexible. So now I know where it comes from.
Well, it comes from many sources, actually. And it comes from playing concertos throughout your career and never being able to quite get what you want. And when you're young and you're starting out, you're very idealistic and you think it has to go this way. And, you know, why can't it be? And you're not used to reality. And the reality is you're dealing with every week 100 different musicians playing this piece. And you're trying to very quickly get them to absorb your interpretation and your thoughts. And so you have to learn two things. You have to learn to be clear, and you have to learn to be a good listener. You have to be bold and clear in your own ideas so that everybody can get the gist of what you're trying to communicate. And you have to be flexible enough to understand that in the heat of the moment, things don't always go as planned, and be able to roll with it. The second training that I found so important came 18 years ago or so, when I took the ballet job, and I started to play some pieces that I'd played in concerts with regular orchestras with staging. And that was a whole different animal. And for the first time, I had to be told, no, you can't do it that way, because the dancers have a million steps in that phrase and it has to go slower. And so the music was no longer the overriding deciding factor. And in those days, when I first took the job, the tradition at the ballet was they would take whatever liberties were necessary in order to get the choreographer's concept across. Now they're very much more score driven, and they approach everything with more of a sense of musical integrity. But in those days, I had to do amazing contortion in order to sell this idea that I didn't musically believe in, both to myself and to the audience. And privately, I would complain about it bitterly, like, how can they make me play it twice as fast as it goes or twice as slow as it goes? Because, I mean, it was really almost that extreme sometimes. Or having to take a huge pause where it wasn't indicated and that kind of thing. But after a while, you learn to make lemonade out of lemons, so to speak. And you can make anything work musically if you get yourself to believe in it, and you say, okay, let's imagine that the composer wrote it this way. How would we convince an audience that this is the only way it goes? And very interesting exercise.
Great. I wanted to pick up on the first idea there of you're needing to be very clear as a soloist and to lead the orchestra to. And I always find that if I am conducting a symphony, I'm definitely in the role of connecting the orchestra with the audience. And I'm sort of standing on the outside, whereas if I'm conducting a concerto, I have the soloist standing on the outside and I'm more on the inside with the orchestra. Can you tell us a bit of your concept of leadership and how it shifts between the conductor and the soloist during a concerto?
It's a funny thing, isn't it? When you're playing, especially from late Romantic through 20th century concertos, let's say, and the conductor's role is so important. how you get this sort of synergy between the two of us. I mean, it was never work with you. It always seemed to come very naturally. But how you find that with different conductors and different artists and with different points of view, coming to a common ground and getting the orchestra to kind of feel that there's a unified point of view. So there has to be listening and there has to be following at the same time. And who follows whom? Sometimes I'm not sure. When it's a good collaboration, sometimes your movement suggests something to me. Sometimes I'll move the tempo in a certain way and you'll get the orchestra to pick up on it. But I think more of these things happen when it's a good chemistry between soloist and conductor. A lot of this happens on an instinctual level.
Yeah.
But I think it has to become almost like big chamber music, in a sense that everybody should be listening and taking responsibility for their parts. And, you think, oh, there's so many violins, it doesn't really matter if, one or two of them are not with the program. But when I started sitting as concertmaster, I very quickly learned that's not the case. I mean, one or two players, that's 5 or 10 or sometimes even 20% of your section, depending on the size of orchestra that you're dealing with. So the main thing is that you're able to sustain everybody in the band has a certain focus that's required. And I guess the conductor, aside from showing objectively where certain sounds are supposed to happen, has to sustain the group consciousness and has to bring the group awareness into the soloist's world, whether he agrees with it or not. I would imagine it's a lot easier if you do kind of agree with the concept than if you don't. Like, remember that famous Glenn Gould, Leonard Bernstein story?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And I find when
came out and
Bernstein
issued a disclaimer, like,
yeah, exactly.
what we're about to do, it's Glenn's concept. I don't agree with it, but here it is, kind of thing. I hope we never have to do that. But
no,
it happened. I'm getting some pretty weird ideas about Beethoven in this enforced quarantine. I've been rethinking a lot of things, Julien.
Yeah.
And you're going to be surprised the next time we
do
collaborate. We
Great.
do the concerto.
I look forward to it. To me, the really the important thing in conducting a concerto is to provide the soloist with as much breathing space as I can.
Yes.
And so in a sense that he can lead, but sort of lead a little bit like he's in front of the cavalry, like he's the first horse going into battle, and that we can be the troops behind him. He can lead while being given that advantage of having extra space so that he can connect to the audience. We give him prime role in connecting with the audience, and with that alchemy that happens between him and the audience, we try to feed off of it and accompany him this way. So for me, thinking of it that way, then the musical concepts are not are not subject to really discussion. It's really what's going to make it possible for him to connect to the audience. And generally, soloist has a pretty good idea of what he needs to connect with the audience. I've really rarely been in a situation where soloists would really give me something that I would have trouble with. I think it's
Right.
precisely in the job of conducting soloists. It's exciting to adapt. It's part of the excitement of the.
Well, this is the whole thing, is going back to the discussion of who's leading and who's following and when. If somebody only follows, if their concept of accompanying is to wait and see what the soloist is going to do, then there isn't true breathing together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so you have to get it to the point where you're kind of breathing together, just as you would in a string quartet. That it's impossible to discern who's leading it. It's at the appropriate time the inner voices are leading, and sometimes the soloist is not dominant also, and so there has to be that give and take in the moment, and I think that's what makes it exciting, is if everybody's kind of on that knife's edge of it almost a positive kind of unpredictability. Like you don't know exactly how long that fermata is going to last. That it's not cut and dried, and that it's not by the beat so much, but you're at the point where even without rehearsal, you can feel exactly what this person is going to do based on their body language and their inner rhythm. And I think inner rhythm is something I think that we have to learn from experience. Everybody has their own sense of inner pulse, and it's really communicating your inner pulse of the music to those around you. As concertmaster as well, you're trying to translate. I'm trying to translate your gestures into a cohesive rhythmic picture that the section can understand, and that's going to, hopefully help the section play together.
Fantastic. So our next meeting will be on your concertmaster activities, and I will have plenty of questions then. And today I wanted to ask you, of course, you talked about your two favorite 20th century concertos. First time I came to hear you at the ballet, you were doing Barber.
I don't know if that's two of them, because then I realized I'm leaving out Alban Berg and I'm leaving out both Prokofievs and so on.
Great.
There are many, but please.
I think some of the questions I had at first was a question about how is it to play a concerto so many times? I mean, I know some soloists do tours with concertos, but you probably play these concertos even more than someone that's on a tour. Then I want to ask you about a recording of yours that I love. That's available on YouTube. That's your Sibelius, and what's that relationship to this piece with your Finnish origins. But let's start with talking about these concertos that you play and that you get to play so much. How is it to get to play something like Barber? You've played probably, I don't know, played it what, 200 times there, or?
I don't know. The stats must be somewhere in the ballet office. I have to count it up some time. I would tend to think I played Stravinsky a bit more, and the Barber is a close second, and then the Prokofiev first and the Berg as well. But they're programmed quite frequently, and so it's been great to get to know those pieces in depth, and also having the evolution of how we perform them go from quite far from what I would do in concert to relatively close to what I would do in concert, with very little. You would have a little more freedom in concert, let's put it that way. The only difference is when you play them at the ballet, the way you did it at the dress rehearsal better be the way you do it in the performance if it's the same cast, because they're relying on that timing. So that's not a bad thing, though. I think the repetition teaches you to be consistent and be sure of the timing you want, and be able to recreate it, and be able to make subtle variations on it without distorting things to the point that the dancers would notice. And the other great thing is, repeating it that much, it reassures you that you'll never get tired of the great music. Because when you play it that much, you might think, well, one day the well's going to run dry and I'm just going to wake up and not want to play that piece anymore. And it never happens. There's always a stone that you left unturned. And so that's when you're repeating stuff. All I need to feel energized is to think to myself, what didn't I do last time? And then find one place where, or maybe two places, where I never got around to exploring a certain idea, and then I go in that direction with the next time. And that keeps it fresh indefinitely. And every time you come back to it, there's some factor that's making it different. So it's just like eating. I mean, I would never get tired of eating my favorite meals. I mean, maybe if I had to do it every day for a whole year, but that's never the case. You intersperse it with so much other great music, and by the time you come back to it, it's fresh again.
Fantastic. I find interesting that, I was looking up the etymology of orchestra the other day, and comes from the Greek word that means a dance. So because probably the first orchestras were there to make people dance. So in accompanying dancers, you actually in the original original function of an orchestra, and in some
Interesting.
ways in very pure
Yes.
form.
Right.
And it's interesting to hear you talk. The few times that I've conducted ballet, including with you, I found that it was a very natural music making experience, actually,
Yeah.
despite what could be felt like constraints and the fact that, for a singer, if you have a 4 or 5 metronome clicks difference, they will say that that was a big difference. But for dancers, just one click difference would feel. But
It does heighten your rhythmic sensitivity, let's put it that way.
exactly,
And it
yeah,
puts you in touch with the fact that the rhythm really is absolutely fundamental.
yeah.
It kind of, at least in ballet, it's the single most important value ahead of everything else. I think I mean, you could say that's true of music making as a whole, in a way. And when you think of it, I think that's one reason why I found playing at the ballet so vital, is all this emphasis on rhythm, and you get to experience it in a completely different way. It changed the way I think about solo Bach, even though we don't play violin solo Bach at the ballet. I wish they would do it, but you think of everything in much more immediate terms. Everything is less abstract and more to the point when you think about it that way.
Wonderful. Let me ask you, just before we turned the recording on, we were talking about the fact that your father was from Finland.
Yes,
And
he was born there. He was about 8 years old when he emigrated.
wow. And when I went to Finland, I saw like lots of people named Nikkanen. And
Not that, I guess it's not that rare a name over there.
yeah, there it's not
Kind of like
very rare at
Johnson.
all. You have soloed with the Helsinki Philharmonic before.
I think
And,
so. Yeah.
so what's your relationship to that Sibelius concerto?
Well, I mean, I having nothing to do with being Finnish or anything else, I always loved it. Since I was a kid and I heard the Heifetz recording, I kind of grew up on that, and then Oistrach and some other, and Isaac Stern. It was always one of my favorite concertos to play. I learned it pretty early in life, probably too young to fully appreciate it. And it actually was one of the first pieces I played in Finland. And I couldn't believe they asked for it, because I was absolutely certain they'd get enough Sibelius over there. And why would they want to import any when they do it so well themselves? But I had a great first experience with that, doing it in Finland. And I had a great conductor, a great orchestra. Osmo Vanska was the conductor.
Oh my gosh.
And it went over pretty well. People didn't hate it, which was a miracle, I thought. And so I felt very accepted. And my whole father's side of the family, my cousins were all there, and they also got to see my suspenders break in the last movement, and my pants almost fell off in the middle of the last movement.
Yeah.
It was only by some luck that I stayed fully dressed to the end of the piece, but it went rather well, and so I had a good positive feeling about that concerto that lasted, for years. It's still one of my favorite pieces to do, and I hope we can do it together soon.
No, I would love to. That would be absolutely fantastic to do Sibelius with you. I had a similar experience with the pants falling down in a Brahms 3. They didn't fall down, but they broke somehow. I heard in the middle of Brahms 3, and then spent most of the concert making sure that the pants would not reach the ground.
I know, but in a way it distracts you, and then you stop worrying about the playing, and you're kind of consumed with the pants, and everything just kind of falls into place. It was one of the better third movements, I think.
Great. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear your. Is there something you would advice you would give? We often see people that would want to be soloists. I've doubts about whether they should be soloists for various reasons.
Well, I think, I mean, I think you got to make that call fairly early in your studies, and you kind of have to realize what that demands and whether you're well suited for it. And I think a lot of it, success or failure, has to do with not only training but early opportunities to play the repertoire. And I was fortunate. I think the only reason it worked at all is I had a lot of regional playing under my belt. There were a lot of professional and semi-professional orchestras in my part of Connecticut when I was growing up, and they all had little competitions, youth competitions. So I got to play at least 8, 9, 10 concertos with orchestra by the time I was 12. And, you know, so just the act of doing it again and again kind of makes you see that as a possibility. And just the fact that people respond well to it, you're getting positive feedback. Of course, after all of that early playing, I came to Juilliard, and the Ballet tore everything down, and it was almost like I had to start over again. And I was like, yep, but I played all those pieces with orchestra. Well, that was then. But the fact is that the confidence of being able to do that remained.
Fantastic.
And so if you don't, that's the main stumbling block, is if you don't have those opportunities and you don't have access to good training. But I think you really have to know what kind of player you are temperamentally, whether you're suited for that kind of life, which entails stress and a lot of uncertainty, especially when you're starting out. And now probably more than ever, because there are twice as many musicians, active soloists out there as when I was in school, you know. But you have to love it so much that you'll go through any amount of suffering to get the artistic result you want and the career you want. If not, as Mr. Lay used to tell us, there are far easier ways to make a living, you know, go be a lawyer or something. But
Absolutely.
I mean, but some people don't want to do that. It's not a question of can't do it. Some people just don't like it. It's a strange lifestyle. Spend a lot of time by yourself. But now I think it's you know, there's so many opportunities of different kinds. And one should strive to do all kinds of playing well, and then just see where it takes you. You know,
Fantastic. In your teaching, do you encounter some of future soloists, some people that want to learn these concertos from you? And
yes, I have a few. I have a few that have the ability and have the desire to do it, and we'll just have to see. I mean, so much luck is involved. It's really hard to say, but the main thing is to go for it with your entire heart and being, and pour your essence into it, and it'll only enrich you and everyone around you if you make the effort.
great. Well, it's great to talk with you today. I look forward to talking about your concertmaster career next week.
Till next week.
Yeah, and then so next week we'll pick up on that and how you transition to be a full-time soloist to being a concertmaster and soloist, and how you balance these two in your playing and in your life, and also your teaching at Kutztown University and privately. Thank you so much for being with us today, everyone. I'll be back. Both of us will be back next week, and then the week after we'll have a special guest with us. And stay tuned.
Fantastic.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
very much. Thank you.